Welcome to the Kick Sugar Coach podcast. Join me each week as I interview experts who will share the science of sugar, sugar addiction, and different approaches to recovery. We hope to empower you with the information and inspiration, insights, and strategies you need to break up with sugar and fall in love with healthy whole foods so you can prevent and reverse chronic disease, lose weight, boost your mood and energy. Feel free to go to my website for details on my coaching programs and to access free resources, kicksugarcoach.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to an interview today with Kathryn Lively. Kathryn has a PhD. She's a professor of sociology, and her areas of expertise that she lectures in is in emotion, identity, and wellness, including weight loss, because she has kept 100-pound plus weight loss off her body for the last 35 years. She is also sugar flour free. Of the last 6 years, she's been fully abstinent, 100% whole food woman. And in addition to being a professor, she also has a boutique coaching company where she does IFS, Internal Family Systems, and she's also a grief counselor therapist, which is really cool. I'd love to learn a bit more about that. Let me see what else to add. In addition to teaching and research, she works with individuals. I think we captured it. Welcome, Kathryn.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So for those of you that know, I interviewed her sister, Laura, which was an amazing story of recovery as well. So what are the odds that you've got two sisters in the same family that are really finding recovery around food addiction, sugar addiction, and weight loss? So that's pretty incredible. Why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about your own journey of how you, I guess, got onto the path of being a whole food woman?
We know probably a lot of your listeners aren't surprised that the two sisters would be in a recovery program for the same substance, actually, because we grew up in the same family. So I was a fat kid my entire life, and it started early. I was a normal weight around 2.5. I had some, I would say, fairly traumatic events happen. At a fairly early age, and my appearance as a result changed dramatically. So I'd started off being very sort of open and blonde and confident and very cute. And by the time I was 5, my hair had gone really dark, and my mother had cut it off in a straight line because she was tired of being accused of having dyed my hair as a little girl. And I had flat feet, and then I had to get glasses at age 5. I was bullied a lot. I had an abusive caretaker, not my immediate family, but there were some issues there. And as a result of all of those childhood incidents, I became very introverted and I lost my self-confidence, and I went very internal, and I turned to food, frankly. That was the family substance of choice. Everyone in my family has used food in various capacities, in very unhealthy ways. I think, like a lot of people who grow up, when you fall down and somebody says, "Oh, eat this cookie, you'll feel better." My sister and I had a very clear example of that. My mother has type 1 juvenile diabetes, and there were literally days where, as her blood sugar was crashing and I would be crying and wanting to know what was wrong with mother, my dad would be telling my mom, "Here, babe, eat this, you'll feel better." And then as I was crying, scared, he would just give me whatever he was giving her, which tended to be, some sort of sugary, tasty treat in order to get her blood sugar up. But it also resulted in getting my blood sugar up, soothing my tears, but also, unfortunately, really making this really deep connection between caretaking, like literally not dying, and eating sugar. And so it's very complicated, I think, in our family for a variety of reasons. There was some sneak eating on my mother's part because she continued to eat and abuse sugar her entire life, even though she was diabetic. And she hid that from my grandmother and other family members, and would often enroll Laura and I in sneaking food for her. And so there was just a lot of really unhealthy behavior around food as a substance. And I don't think they would have recognized their behavior as such, but we were definitely well into the sugar at a very, very early age. And so I think by the time I was 16, I guess I think one of my most horrifying shaming story happened in middle school. And this was in the United States, they have these things called the presidential fitness test, and you would have to do all these things, including getting weighed and run a mile and all these things you'd have to do. And I remember I was in middle school, so I was in 8th grade, and I got on the scale in the girls' locker room, or the girls' coach's room. And she said, and it was 180, and I was in middle school, and she was flabbergasted. And of course, her daughter, the cheerleader, was sitting on the desk trying not to laugh. And her mom kept saying, "That can't be right. That can't be right." And I was like, "It's right." She said, "That can't be right." And she said, "I want you to go down to Coach Rogers' office and weigh on the men's scale." She said, "I think the scale is broken." And I'm like, you just weighed the last 30 people and it was fine. I said, "It's fine. This is the number." And she's like, "No, go down there. I don't believe it." And because I've carried my weight well, but so I walked down the gym, and she said, and she yells from one end of this is a full basketball court, "Coach Rogers, I'm sending Lively down there to weigh because I think the scale's done broke." And of course, everyone in the gym just like cracked up, and it literally like was my walk of shame. Now, that didn't stop me from eating, because I had this protective mechanism or understanding in my household. I was still the smallest person because my sister outweighed me. I was the youngest. That's why I was the smallest. And so I did not realize, even though I'd had all these shaming instances, I knew I had been made fun of, I still wasn't as big as everyone else in my family. And so I took some pride in that. It wasn't until my mother sent me to Weight Watchers because Laura needed to go. And like I said, this is how the passive aggressiveness works in our family. She said, "You need to go to Weight Watchers to help your sister." And so I went, and the woman, again with the scale, was a friend of mine's mother.
Oh, God.
Actually, she wasn't even a friend. She was this girl who sat in front of me in history, and she was literally the size of a pencil. And the woman, when she called the number out, she goes, "Oh, 232 and a half." And at that point, I was 16 years old. So I was a sophomore in high school, 232 and a half. I say that number still all the time on the clock. I sort of have coded it as my own personal message from heaven that I'm not that person anymore. But that was a moment. And I decided at age 16, I was never going to see that number again. And I was militant. No doubt about it. I never broke plan. The weight came off. I was 16. So, but what happened was that people were so invested in my journey that they were actually, and I don't know if you've ever been to a Weight Watchers meetings, but this is back in the day, back in the 80s when the program still worked, where you would, you'd weigh in public. They would say it out loud. You would go into a room. People would ask you if you gained or you lost. It was very public, people talking about the numbers. And I noticed that people got really invested in my success. And in some cases, it seemed to me that they were more invested in my success than their own. And at 16, the pressure became a lot. Now, my sister was in that Weight Watchers program. She had lost a ton of weight. My dad had eventually joined. And so we had all lost close to 100 pounds or more than 100 pounds as a family. And so again, there was almost this celebrity status that became too much. And I got down to 142 and a half, and I could not get down to my goal, which was 140. And I just couldn't. I could not do it. Now, at this point, I didn't realize what had changed during this time was that Weight Watchers had started rolling out Weight Watchers frozen desserts. which had a lot of sugar in them and a lot of artificial sweeteners and all that kind of stuff. And I honestly believe that it was me eating those types of things, which is what was preventing me, and also hijacking my brain and keeping, now that I understand addiction more and how people are really addicted to sugar, that those were keeping my brain activated so that I couldn't actually get to goal. And of course, in my arrogance, it didn't even occur to me that I could have changed my goal. And so in a fit of really trying to get down there, I developed an eating disorder and I started abusing laxatives. And at some point, I was back up to 156 and I just thought, I give up. Like, I was so close and I gave up. But I wasn't going to get fat again. Like, I was determined never to see 200. And I never did. But what I noticed over the course of the next 30 years is that I sort of was operating like a thermostat. And so it's like almost a cybernetic system in the sense that I was comfortable between the weights of 155 and 175. And if I got too small, I would freak out and gain weight. And if I got too heavy, I would freak out and lose weight. But that was sort of my sweet spot. And I moved back and forth between that 155, 175, occasionally getting down to 145, like for 30 years. But I tried every diet in the book, including giving up sugar on occasions. And that always worked. I always knew that giving up sugar always worked. But then there would be like something, or I'd be like, oh, I can have one piece of something. And then the next thing I know, it would be two pieces. And the next thing I would know, I would have 6 or 8 of those pieces squirreled away in my desk at work. And the next day there would be like 8 empty packages in the trash can. And so it was always a really, really slippery slope. Now, I did not fully commit to sugar-free, flour-free, plant-based until 6 years ago. And ironically, it was the same reason that got me to Weight Watchers. My sister, who you talked to, called me one day and she said, hey, I'm going to start this food program. And I just said, knock yourself out. Because for 30 years, I had been begging her to try this diet or to try that diet or try this supplement or do this thing. And she just, if I suggested it, it was like toxic to her. And so I had just given up. And I just said, okay, good, knock yourself out. And then I called her a week later or 2 weeks later, it's about 10 days. And she looked different and she looked happy and she looked serene and she was in a good mood. And I was like, hello, what have you done with my sister? Like, what is up with you? And she's like, I think it's that food plan. I was like, really? She goes, yeah. She's like, I've slept for the first time in 30 years. And I was like, well, that'll do it. And so then she dropped the bombshell. I want you to consider doing it on this program with me. And I was like, what? And she said, yeah. She said, she said, it's really good for people who need to lose a lot of weight, but it's also good for skinny people who are like crazy about their food. And you're the craziest skinny person that I've ever met. And she wasn't wrong. And I happened to be on one of those upswings. I had just taken a new job where I was doing a lot of entertaining, a lot of catering. I was noticing a lot more food thoughts. My weight was going up. And so I signed on in the program and like the weight just started falling off. I waited until I knew my husband was going to be gone for 3 or 4 days because everybody online had said, there's usually a 3 or 4 day detox, like if you're lucky, but it can be anywhere from 3 to 4 months, depending on how bad your diet has been. Mine was pretty good, except I was a massive stevia user. And this program is all sweeteners, like not just sugar, but all sweeteners. So no agave, no natural sweeteners, just nothing. And I must admit, still to this day, whenever I smell stevia, it makes my hands shake. Like stevia is still an Achilles heel for me. I found a bottle the other day and I was like, I'm just going to dump this out. And like taking the lid off, I almost dropped it. Like just the smell is so overpowering to me now. And I think I was using dropperfuls of it. So this program is, talks about a lot about the science of addiction and addiction to sugar and flour and all of their forms. And it really started to make sense to me because I had noticed, and I had sort of known my entire life, that the only real way to keep your weight off long term is you have to rearrange your life. You've got eating friends, you're going to have to change those relationships. You don't have to replace them, but you have to transform the relationships. And sometimes those relationships just cannot be transformed depending on the other person's relationships to the food. There's just certain things that you cannot do anymore. And I always knew that. And in my mind, I'd always said, you're going to be really successful at this. You're going to have to treat it the way an alcoholic treats alcohol. But I had never really thought about the fact that even though I knew that's how you would be successful, is that I might need to consider or to adopt or even consider the possibility that I might have addictive behaviors around sugar flour, that I might be actually addicted to sugar and flour, or that I actually might be a food addict. I mean, I'd heard all those terms before. I had attended like one OA meeting and decided it was not for me and I was never going back. But there was something about the science of food addiction, my own observations and my own flirtations with giving up sugar, having it be wildly successful, only to have it come roaring back. That once I allowed myself to fully sort of sink into and really adopt that identity and what that meant, I actually found it to be quite freeing. Like there's a lot of debate, I think, among people who have issues with sugar and flour. Like, is food addiction real? Is this something that, does this mean that I'm an addict? And I don't, in my mind, that has actually been a very useful adaptation for me to take that label on, because that helps give me a better roadmap about like what's going to be absolutely necessary if I want to live this way for the rest of my life, which I do. Because whereas before, I would say 78% of my bandwidth was taken up thinking about my food. Was I eating too much? My weight, my stomach, my clothes. How am I going to get all my exercise in today? Like all those things. It was just a cacophony of chaos in my mind. And like, all that's gone. Like I rarely think about my weight. I don't weigh anymore. I mean, I do occasionally, like maybe once every 2 months, and it's always the same. I don't worry about my clothes fitting anymore. If I don't exercise, I don't have to exercise because it's not going to affect my weight or anything. So it's been a really interesting transition. And it's all, and I know, and honestly, it is the sugar. It is. And the way I know that it's the sugar is that I've gotten into the sugar twice by accident. Like it was at a restaurant meal where I'd said, no sauce or whatever. They put the sauce on. I thought, well, I'll take the chance. Like I literally could feel it in my brain, like after not having had it for a few years. And it's just, one of the mantras is, none is so much easier than some. And it's so true. And so the last 6 years since I've been sugar and flour free have just been like easy. Like, yeah, I don't go out with the same friends. I don't eat the same way I used to. And there's a lot more food preparation in my life and make sure I have what I need. But I wouldn't change that for the world. Just the constant crazy making, up, down, trying to lose weight. What's the new diet? Oh my God, it's a nightmare.
Incredible. So when you first embraced, I think what I've got going on here is addiction. My solution is no sugar, no flour, abstinence, bounded portions, I'm assuming, right? And you didn't ever relapse except accidentally in the last 6 years? No slips, no moments of like, oh,
Well, it's funny you use the word slip, actually. Let me see. I think it was in 2019. The years have run together in the pandemic. I think it was in 2019. I slipped on some ice and I fell and I broke my femur and I shattered the ball of my shoulder.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I have about 14 pieces of metal in this arm. And it took a lot of surgery and a lot of it was like 3.5 hours of physical therapy a day for 6 months in order to get full range of motion back, which I do have full range of motion now. Again, and I'm beginning to build strength. So that's all fine. Pain is a willpower depleter. And that time was hard. Like those 6 months, well, part of it was I was on narcotics because it was just, you couldn't not be on narcotics. And well, I guess you could be, but it was bad. I mean, I wasn't sleeping. I was on total narcotics. And then the physical therapy, like it was so excruciating. It was just, I was in constant pain. And because you had to take the opioids every 6 hours with food, every 4 hours with food, that meant I was having 6 meals a day as opposed to the 3 meals that I had been used to eating. And so I was also relying on somebody else to bring me food. And although my husband, was wonderful about, getting me salads and, all kinds of stuff, sometimes it was just easier to eat hard-boiled eggs or eat oatmeal or something like that in order to do that. And so I definitely put some weight on, but I did not have sugar and flour. And matter of fact, I told him very specifically, I was like, even if I ask for it, like, I beg you, do not let me do this right now because I am so depleted that it would be really bad. And so the structure of my overall program became really sort of wonky during that period, not because of the sugar and flour, it was the quantities. And I tend to have more of a quantities issue, frankly, with food. I mean, I think that was just the years of really eating healthy food, but eating a lot of it. And so like including some starchy things. But during COVID also, I went through a very stressful period of my life and where I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't doing any of the other things necessary to take care of myself. I mean, the other thing is I really layered in a ridiculous amount of self-care during this process of becoming abstinent. And both during the time that I broke my shoulder and then also during this really stressful period at work, all of that stuff fell apart. And I that was like another period where my weight had gone up about 9 pounds or so, between 9 and 13 pounds. But when I finally just said, okay, let's just seriously clean this up. And again, it was about just dusting up the quantities, making sure I wasn't licking the tahini jar, doing any of that. And it was shocking. Like the weight just fell off. Like I lost that 13 pounds in 3 months and my weight has stayed perfectly normal. But I've got my self-care back too.
Incredible. Wow. Wow. It's pretty unusual actually. That someone just goes, "Oh, I'm addicted to sugar. Okay, that's that. I'll just stop eating it." Right. So, I mean, it must have been years of getting ready for that letting go.
Well, there were years of getting ready. Well, I think it was just desperation. Honestly, I had literally tried everything. I live in New Hampshire. I had done a raw diet in the winter. I had done it all. Actually, there was this one moment. So I'm a sociology professor. I had a mentor. He passed away last year, but he was super brilliant. And he had this whole theory that he had developed. It's mathematical, it's computational, it's very sophisticated, but in its essence, it's very simple. You can basically predict, if you understand how a person thinks about themselves and who they are and what kind of person they are, you can pretty much predict what they're going to do if you put them in a situation with another person and you have a definition of who they think that person is. And so it has a high predictive capacity in terms of our emotions, our interactions, our behaviors. It's actually sort of spooky. And he was always making jokes with his theory. And so he had suffered a pretty substantial heart attack. And then I saw him at a conference and he had lost a ton of weight. He was standing next to this banquet of just all kinds of stuff. And there he was, like, getting some cucumbers and some salad and some carrots. And then he had a little bag of like nuts and like pistachios and seaweed. And I was really impressed because I was like, and I said, Dave, that's really impressive. And I was like, I'm so impressed that you've been able to keep to your diet. And he goes, Kathryn, that, and he pointed to all the desserts and said, that is poison to me. He goes, that will kill me. And then he said, what kind of a person would knowingly eat poison knowing that it's going to kill them? Which is an allusion to his theory. And I said, an idiot? And he goes, yes. And do I look like an idiot to you? And that, I must admit, when I first looked at that food program, that conversation, that little snippet of conversation came back to me. And I had to ask myself, that stuff makes you crazy. What kind of person is going to knowingly eat something that's going to make you crazy? And I was like, an idiot. And I don't look like an idiot. And it seems really simple, but that one little statement came down to like, what kind of person do I want to be? And what kind of life do I want to have? And it's all going to come down to not putting that in my body. And it seemed worth it. Yeah. And I also know that over the last 50 years, I had more than my fair share of all that stuff. And it didn't really serve me. There's not that much that I still need to taste in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. I know. And it's the exhaustion of chasing the illusion that we'll ever get satisfied, that we'll ever truly ever go, oh, I've had enough. That's just never going to happen. And eventually you go, I can't do this anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there were years of exhaustion. I think I was ready to surrender at that particular moment. Mm-hmm. I was just so tired. And then I also, I had this just one little pithy statement from someone whom I really respected and who I had watched turn his own health around. Like, he had been like, drinking scotch and eating steaks and smoking cigars. And he was like one of those old crusty, academics. And he was no longer smoked, no longer drank, didn't eat sugar, flour.
Well, he cut it all out.
He just cut it all out.
Wow.
And he lived for another 20 years.
He must have been right spooked by his heart attack. He must have come close, hey?
Well, I think he came close, but he really is one of these people that he understood how the mind works. And he was like, you know what? That's just not who I want to be. And all I have to do is like set this identity for myself. And then, and the behaviors and the emotions will follow.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I must admit, it is an identity reset. Like no one ever says, well, I'll just give it up for a while or I'll see what this is like. I mean, once you can really, truly say, I no longer eat that because it's either going to kill me or it makes my brain, or it makes me unhappy, or it makes me a worse wife or a worse mother, or, I think once you can actually say that, like, I just don't do that anymore. Not like, oh, I shouldn't do that, or, oh, I wish I could stop that, or, oh, I shouldn't eat so much. It's like, no, I don't do that anymore. And, people don't have the problem with, people who I think who decide to become vegetarian, people rarely say, oh, are you sure you don't want some bacon? I mean, but you do get that with sugar a lot. Like, oh, are you sure? Like, you're fine. You're a normal weight. Like, are you still on that? Are you still doing that food plan? Yes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Speaking of the challenges that people can face as they attempt to adopt and then maintain or sustain a sugar flour-free life, what are your thoughts on that? What are some of your suggestions or insights?
Well, one of my ongoing research projects is I'm studying members of an online weight loss community that are basically sugar and flour free. And, I think some of the most challenging things, honestly, and is I don't, this sounds terrible. Families. Families are the hardest. Um, I'm really fortunate in the sense that, well, actually, so as a sociologist, I've always been aware of all the cultural practices that we have around food. You just can't get away from it. And food or alcohol. And, you go get a drink, you have this, you got to have this for Christmas. And I've always thought it was interesting that all the things that we celebrate with are literally like the worst things for us. It's so interesting to me. But I've actually been really fortunate in the sense that my husband and I have never eaten the same food ever. And we don't, when we sit down, we always eat our meals together, but we eat different things because we like different foods. And most people have a really hard time with that. Like they feel really compelled to eat what their partner's having, or if they have kids, then they don't want to be making, 3 or 4 different things. But I found just being willing to not eat what other people are eating and not worry about it is huge. But for some families, that can be a big issue. Either like they don't feel as connected to their partner if they're not eating the same thing that they're eating, or they just might not have time, or they feel like that they have to cook both meals, like their partner's not going to cook, so they're going to have to like cook 2 meals, and if they're working, then that can be a hassle too. So I think that family, I think expectations, I think that we've got so much of our our celebrations and our ceremonies and our special occasions are all coded with food, like from the get-go. I mean, it's really insanity if you think about it, that we tell kids they can't have sugar for a year, and then we sit an entire sheet cake in front of them, or a 2-layer 8-inch round cake, and just like let them go head down in the thing, and then we all laugh about it and take pictures and ooh and ah how cute it is, and yet you're giving them this stuff at the same time that they're getting tons of presents, people are singing to them, that they're celebrating them. And so we're literally just coding it into we're conditioning ourselves to have like love, celebration, center of attention, fun, to all these things that are just really, truly horrible. So I think part of it's the conditioning. I think it's the cultural conditioning, the social pressure. I think that just the fact that we work so much in the United States, and a lot of other countries too, people eat their lunches in cars. They eat in the car. They're picking their kids up between errands. We just don't have the time, really, I think, to cook and take care of ourselves in the way that we deserve to be cooked for and taken care of. And I think if you have a family and you've got a lot of different food considerations, and that you have to get really careful and creative about how to to come up with a method of cooking that allows you to get what you need without having to spend a lot of time getting it on the table.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Interesting.
And I also think, we live in a culture where people will comment about if you've lost weight, but they don't ever comment if you've gained weight, really. Like, or until it's like really obvious, and then you're getting shamed, like in a store or something. But, it's just, we just don't, it's just, people are so funny about what they're willing to talk about when it comes to weight. And so oftentimes, even when people are losing weight, they get a lot of negative pushback. And it's like, oh, you don't want to lose too much weight. Like, oh my goodness, like, because you're messing up the status quo. Like all of a sudden you're different, and which may require that other people examine their own lives. And when you're in a normal sized body and you're still saying no thank you, to the sugar cookies and the pita chips, then the pressure actually gets ratcheted up, which is so weird. Because people assume that it's just about the weight. And to me, yes, the weight was the icing on the cake, so to speak. But the real benefit has to do with the clarity and the freedom of being obsessed with food. To me, that's the real benefit of being sugar-free, flour-free.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me about the role of grief and maybe IFS and your own journey and how you work with people and what role you think it plays in the recovery process.
Yeah, so I'm a grief, what's it called?
Doula,
It's
doula,
funny.
grief
No,
doula.
it's a grief. It's so funny that I'm blanking on this. Grief recovery method specialist. So it's
Okay.
not a counselor. Um, it's actually an educational program, and it helps people deal with basically unresolved grief, and it can be grief in anything. And I've done several of them. As I said, I went through a really challenging period during the pandemic, um, and so grief is basically, according to this definition, is undelivered communication. And so it's any relationship and they can be with someone who's living or dead, which, you wish that it had been better, different, or more than it was. And so I asked a woman that I had learned the method from, and I said, do people ever do this on their body? And because I certainly have had a relationship with my body for the bulk of my life that I wish that it had been better, different, or more than it was. And she said, oh, yeah, people do them on their body. She said, they're really personal, actually. They tend to be really personal. And it was one of the most personal ones that I've done. And so the process is that, well, first of all, I get you sensitized to different definitions about what loss is and what grief is. We tend to think about grief as, a natural emotional response as a result of a death or a loss of a loved one, like usually through death or divorce. And they're saying no, actually. It's much, much, much broader than that. It is the normal and natural response, mixed emotions that you have when your expectations weren't met, or when you wish something had been better, different, or more than it was. And so I started thinking about that I really wanted to do one on my body. And so there's a whole series of steps that you go through with the practitioner who's leading you through this. But then you put like on a timeline, and it's just really rote, and it's shocking that it works as well as it does, and it gets as much as you can. But you put a timeline on of your entire life. Like, what was your relationship like with your body your entire life? And when I first started, I was thinking it was going to be just about the weight, honestly. But then I was like, oh yeah, you got glasses at age 5. Oh yeah, you had cystic acne, starting at age 13. And then when you were 16, you had to have Accutane, and all your skin fell off and your lips were cracked all the time. And it's like, oh, and what about when you broke this? And I realized it was so much more than just the weight, that there was also periods when I was not abstinent and I was abusing laxatives. And there were periods of times when I was binge drinking. And there were times in my life where I had engaged in other types of what they call STIRBs, which are short-term energy releasing behaviors, because I wasn't dealing with the things that had made me so unhappy to begin with. And so part of the components of the grief recovery method program is that you basically deliver unsaid communications. And so there are forgivenesses. So if you need to forgive the person in this case, like, where did I need to forgive my body? Like, where did I need to apologize to my body for something that I had done? They really make a distinction that apologies and forgiveness, two different things. And what were the significant emotional statements that you needed to make to my body, both positive and negative? And, I wrote this thing, and then you end up culminating it into a letter, and then you read it out loud to a compassionate witness who's not going to judge you. It was first of all, it was 11 pages long. And it was a very complicated relationship, I realized, that I had with my body over the years. I realized that I had a lot more gratitude for it than I had ever allowed myself to feel. I realized that I had been a lot worse to my body than my body had been to me. So I had a lot of apologies to make. And there were so many tears, Florence. Oh, so many tears. I cried so much for this body. And it was like, I've described this process as like wringing blood out of a stone. Like, there was so much grief in there that I had no idea that I had been carrying since childhood, like since I was a little girl. Because I was clumsy. I had flat feet. I had to wear orthopedic shoes, the whole 9 yards. And, you know, when it was over, like all I could see was the appreciation that I had for this body that I had been so harsh about like my entire life. It completely transformed my relationship with my body. It was, so that was a very powerful, that was probably the most powerful thing that I've done in terms of that type of work. I also am an IFS practitioner like my sister. And in fact, I'm actually going to start my level 2 training, which I'm excited about because it's on addictions and eating disorders. So I'm really excited about that. That's going to start in a week from now. But so IFS has been super helpful. Meditation has been really helpful. Learning to spend time in nature has been really helpful, and just giving myself actually a time to be a human being. I mean, I know they always say you're a human being, not a human doing. Well, I was sort of a workaholic, prior to this. And so I had to really, it's true when they say, when you take away the stuff that made when you get rid of the stuff that you use, like when you're using food, the things that, and you get rid of the weight, the things that made you fat to begin with are still there. And that's when you've got to then do the work to figure out what those things are. And so IFS was one pathway. The grief recovery method was that way. I was able to also let a lot of grief go that I've been carrying around my relationships with my family members. And again, all that weighs on you emotionally, energetically. And if you don't actually understand why you're unhappy and sad, or why there are parts of you who are, who still wish things were different, better, more than they were, then you're going to continue to medicate them somehow. And you're either going to do it in ways that are healthy, or you're going to do it in ways that just completely numb it. And so I would like to think that, in this second half of my life, I'm actually dealing with them and looking at them with as much compassion and curiosity as I can muster, as opposed to just burying them in whatever I can get my hands on, or whatever's on sale at the convenience store.
Totally. Wow, amazing. And where did this grief recovery work come in? Like, was it early on? Like, at what stage of your journey with abstinence?
It came during right after that really stressful period at work where I had gained that 13 pounds, and I was not happy with my body again. I was getting stressed out. I was feeling like, I cannot believe that you're about to have gained all the weight that you took off by not eating sugar and flour. And I was just really, really unhappy again. And just sort of frenetic. Again, I wasn't doing any of my self-care either. I mean, all of it had fallen away. And so I started working with with an individual doing a grief recovery method, not the original one on the body. I've done them on a number of things. I've done them on many relationships. I've done them on work relationships. I've done them on money, my relationship with money. But by far, the one with my body was the most personal and the most painful. So that sort of kicked off the new era of the deep inner work. And then as soon as I finished the GRM with her, I then proceeded to go into IFS therapy. And then I was started to get trained as a practitioner 3 or 4 months later.
Mm-hmm. So how long had you been roughly like sugar flour free by the time you started this leg of the deeper recovery work?
Probably about 3 years.
Oh,
It's probably about halfway through.
okay.
3 or 4 years. No, the first 3 or 4 years came easy. It was like grace, honestly. After 3 days, all the cravings were gone. And again, I had that sort of black or white mindset. It was like, never going to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
The arm in 2019 sort of like was the first crack, like in the program. It sort of undermined just how easy everything was. Everything became a little bit harder. And then when COVID happened, the job I was in was it was not a COVID friendly job. Let's put it that way. And that put a lot more cracks in the foundation of my program. And again, I never sugar and flour, but I got a little bit sloppy on the quantities, and because I wasn't sleeping and the whole 9 yards, the stress was just creeping back in. And then I realized that, white knuckling it and just deciding you're not going to do it, that worked for a while. But when the road gets rough, you need a lot more support. And that's where the inner work comes in. Both my parents are elderly. I'm assuming that I'm going to lose one or more of them, one or both of them in the next few years based on their health. And so I need to make sure that I am fortified in my program, because my food is my keystone habit. It is the one thing that I have to have nailed down for my life to work. But in order for that to work all the time, I also have to be doing my inner work.
Got it. And the thing that's interesting is many of us can get sugar flour free, but we watch our relationship to the volume aspect piece of the puzzle sort of ebb and flow a little bit with those stress levels. How did you get yourself back on track with the escalation of portions?
This was actually really interesting. I took an IFS class, and it was a writing class. It was the purpose was to get to know your addicted part. And so I don't know what you know about internal family systems.
I do. Yeah.
But so I found my addicted part. And so what they have you do is they start with the parts of you who don't like the addicted part, the ones who are scared of it. And so you have to get past them first. You have to get to know them. And you have to get them to trust you. So you worked with them for a while. And then eventually they allowed me to see the addicted one. And it literally was a werewolf. It was this starving, slathering, Fenrir Greyback from Harry Potter. I mean, it was just that level of and it locked in a cage. And so the protectors were over here with the keys, and they were just you can't get near him. He'll kill you. And I was like, wow. And so I literally, in my mind, in my meditations, I would go down and I would just sit outside the cage and just have this beast actually snarl at me. And I would just talk to it, and I would sing to it in my meditations, and I would send it light. I eventually thought there was an exile behind it. I had a little girl in the cage with him. And eventually because I was ravenous, because I had also changed my food. I had taken food out. So I was also physically battling hunger while I was also doing this mental inner work. And I got the bright idea. I was like, why don't you feed him? And so in my mind, I started cooking steak and roasted vegetables, and I would take it downstairs. And as I would go sit with my part, I would slide it in the cage. And again, this is all in my mind. And he would eat ravenously. And then eventually we got to know each other. And finally, one of the managers who had the keys gave me the keys and said, he's all yours. Because she trusted me enough, because I showed up consistently to be with that part. And I wasn't scared of him. And gradually he turned into a pit bull. And his name is Finn. And he's very loyal. And it's not lost on me, because sometimes that's what happens is our parts transform and they become less scary versions of themselves once they become less polarized through the process of spending time with self. That's the whole purpose behind IFS, is to build more self-part relationship so that they don't have to be so polarized or so extreme in what they're doing. And so over time, when I built the relationship with the part of me who is addicted and who just wants copious amounts of food all the time, he transformed into a pit bull. And it's not lost on me that it's a pit bull, which, is still considered to be a dangerous animal. And by a lot of people, they don't want them, they're scared of them. So I respect my addicted part. And I know, and I still spend time with him occasionally, and occasionally he rears his head. And I'm and I have to double check, have I been up too much? Have I really not eaten enough food today? Have I done too much exercise? Is this real? When I'm really hungry, he actually now tells me. And so I respect that. And I will actually, I will add food if the situation warrants it. But it's a much different relationship now. It literally felt like they had me by the throat when I first took the food out. it was shocking, but it was astounding to me though, that just in a 15-minute meditation every day, going down into the center of my mind, into this, what looked like a pit, and sitting with this rabid animal, on the outside of a cage, that I could literally tame my own physiological hunger by taming this part of my mind and getting to know it and appreciating what it was trying to do for me. Because he was protecting that little one. And so once I got past him, I could then deal with the pain of the exile. And that issue has really gone away.
And when you were able to get connected to the exile, what did you do then? What did that look like?
Well, the process in IFS is you have to witness the exile. And so you don't actually necessarily know what the exile's pain is about. You might think but it's almost never what you think it is. And so you go into whatever memory that the exile or the manager chooses to take you into. And it's usually some past memory that you've forgotten about, or completely forgotten about, or maybe you remember it, but you don't remember why it was significant. And all of a sudden you're just in there. And sometimes it feels like you're just like watching a movie. Sometimes the exile will just tell you. I actually can see my exiles and I hear them pretty clearly. Other people just sense it, they get the sensation of the feelings. And so you just witness it. And it's usually just some childhood event that you had, and so from your adult eyes, it might not even look like a big deal, but you experience it through the emotions of the exile. How were they feeling about it at that time? What were the beliefs they took on as a result of that? How lonely did they feel? How stupid were they made to feel? How much shame do they have around something? And part of witnessing the exile means you feel all that with them. And because you didn't feel it the first time. That's the problem. That's why they're called an exile. And so it basically, you're processing those feelings, and then you can take the exile out of this environment, which is usually, dark and scary, again, through the eyes of that scared child. You take them into a more beautiful, bucolic scene. You ask them what they beliefs that they took on about themselves now that they no longer need them. Honestly, I can't even remember what she got rid of. At that point, it was a lot. And then she added in gifts. She wanted to feel safe. She wanted to feel loved. She wanted to play. She wanted more joy. And then I asked her if she wanted to stay here, if she wanted to go back with Finn, or if she wanted to live with me. And she said she wanted to live with me in the present, but she wanted Finn to come with her. And so I brought them, quote, into the present. And I proceeded to check in on both of them for about 30 days. Sometimes they were there, sometimes they weren't. And, and eventually, not that I've forgotten about them, but they don't come up as much anymore.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Thank you for all that detail. Amazing. All right. I could talk to you all day, Kathryn, but how about we wrap this up by me asking, is there any final words you'd like to share on the topic of sugar addiction recovery, or food addiction recovery?
Depending on where people are on their journey, I think, the hardest part is just deciding. And then once you can really just truly decide and surrender to that, I said that adopting the term addict worked for me. It doesn't for a lot of people. They hate that term, and they have a lot of shame around it for various reasons. Whatever you need to do in order to make the right decision for you, whatever that decision is, I don't think you have to justify it to anyone. And adopting a lifestyle that is going to allow you to be your absolute best is, God, it's so much better than anything could possibly ever taste. Another piece of advice that I got, and I guess that I would leave this is that, because I know that for some people, it's they get so focused on the one thing they're never going to have again, or the cake at their daughter's wedding. Their daughter's 3 and they're thinking about if she's going to get married when she's 36, but they still can't get over that one bite they're not going to get to have. And So a coach said this to me a long time ago, and he said, the problem is that most people think about whatever it is they're trying to give up, like what it's going to taste like in their mouth or what it's going to feel like in their hand or whatever. It's like they're looking at that first 15 seconds of gratification. He said, if you really want to be successful long term, you really have to focus on how is it going to feel like. You just take time out of the equation and focus on how are you going to feel 2 hours after you've had it, and then how are you going to feel the next day. And when I stopped focusing on, what's this going to taste like right now versus how am I going to feel about it 2 hours later when the sanity is returned, like no contest. And if I think about how I would think about it the next day, I wouldn't even look twice at it. It's never worth it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kathryn. This was an amazing interview. I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks for tuning in this week. If you would like more interviews, more information, and more inspiration on how to break up with sugar, go to my YouTube channel, Kick Sugar Coach, or my website, kicksugarcoach.com. See you next week.